Welcome to this explainer. If you're a focused learner looking to completely shift how you look at failure and success, well, you're in the right place today. We're going to dive into a concept that is remarkably brief, but honestly deeply profound. It's one of those ideas that takes something we all universally dread and completely flips it on its head. Yeah, we're talking about rejection. But look, we aren't just going to sit here and talk about how to survive it or how to comfort ourselves after a door gets slammed in our face. Instead, we're going to look at a highly structured, intentional framework that uses rejection as a powerful tool for permanent personal growth. Let's get right into it. So, what if rejection was a discipline? Normally, we think of rejection as this awful, painful event, right? It's the unreturned phone call, a denied application, getting ghosted. It's just something that happens to us, usually leaving us feeling pretty powerless or discouraged. But the source material we're breaking down today introduces a totally counterintuitive idea. It asks us to stop viewing rejection as some random external hazard and instead view it as a discipline. And a discipline is something you actively practice. It's something you schedule, something you study, and crazy as it sounds, something you deliberately subject yourself to just to get stronger. Here is the entire source text we're analyzing today. It takes that sinking feeling of getting left on read and just completely reframes it. It's literally just two sentences. Practice response to rejection. Stretching yourself in an area where you're likely to get rejected will only help you to further raise your trait resilience level. That's it. It's incredibly brief, but wow, it is dense. Actually, these two sentences are basically a masterclass in psychological reframing. So for the rest of this explainer, we're going to slow things way down. We'll deconstruct these words meticulously, word by word, to figure out exactly how this mechanism works and how it can totally transform your approach to adversity. Okay, let's dive into this. Section 1, the discipline of rejection. To really grasp the power of this text, we first got to move away from our default human programming, because let's face it, we are wired to avoid social and professional pain at all costs. But the linguistic contrast in our source material here is super striking. On one side, we have our traditional view, rejection as a negative, passive event. You're the victim of circumstance, you hope it doesn't happen, and when it inevitably does, you retreat. But on the other side, we have the text's proposition, rejection as an active, structured discipline. By framing it this way, the text essentially strips away the emotional sting and replaces it with pure utility. If rejection is a discipline, then every single no is just another rep in the gym. It transforms fear into a curriculum. You aren't just enduring hardship anymore, you're actively structuring your exposure to it for a very specific, beneficial purpose. Moving right along to Section 2. Practicing your response. Let's zoom in on the first specific directive from the text, practiced response to rejection. I want to focus really deeply and deliberately on these 4 words. The word practice is the absolute anchor here, because what does it actually mean to practice? It implies intentional action, right? It implies repetition, awareness, and preparation. Think about it. When a musician practices their scales, they aren't surprised by the notes. They're mastering their execution of them. By telling us to practice our response, the text is commanding us to stop reacting spontaneously out of fear or embarrassment and to start treating our reaction as an actual skill that can be honed over time. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the clear dichotomy between how we naturally operate versus how the text instructs us to operate. An unpracticed response is deeply rooted in avoidance and fear. It's messy, it's emotional, it's highly defensive. We shut down, we get angry, or we just vow to never, ever try again. But a practiced response, that is calculated and intentional. Because you knew the rejection was a possibility. Because you're treating it as a discipline, your response stays incredibly steady. You acknowledge the rejection, analyze it without taking it personally, and use it as pure data. You've literally rehearsed this moment, which completely robs the rejection of its power to knock you off balance. Which brings us to Section 3, stretching into discomfort. Okay, here's where the concept moves from a mental framing exercise into physical reality. The second sentence starts, stretching yourself in an area where you're likely to get rejected. Let's just meditate on that word, stretching, for a second. Notice the text doesn't say breaking yourself, and it doesn't say destroying yourself. Stretching implies an elongation of your current capabilities. It means pushing just past the boundary of what feels comfortable. But honestly, the most counterintuitive instruction here is the condition of this stretching. It says you must do it in an area where you are likely to get rejected. You are literally being instructed to actively seek out scenarios with a high probability of failure. And why? Well, because if there's no likelihood of rejection, there's no tension. And without tension, there is simply no stretching. Let's see how this builds into a deliberate mechanism of action, because the source presents an exact logical flow here.
Step 1. Identify an area of likely rejection. This takes some radical honesty about where your boundaries currently lie. Step 2. Stretch yourself in that area. Take the action, make the ask, submit the proposal, going in fully knowing a no is the probable outcome. And step 3. Raise trait resilience. This is the output. You see, the text sets up this mechanical relationship. Input the stretch, output the resilience. It is a highly reliable, structured formula for personal growth.
So I want you to take a moment right now to directly engage with this concept. Let's turn this static text into a personal, introspective challenge for us today. Where are you likely to get rejected? Is it asking for a promotion at work? Is it pitching a bold new idea to a client? Or maybe a creative endeavor you've just been way too afraid to share? Because look, if you examine your life right now and you cannot find a single area where you're likely to face rejection, the text strongly suggests you simply aren't stretching. You're resting comfortably inside your established boundaries, which means your growth has completely stagnated. Let's move to section 4, raising trait resilience. Now we transition to the ultimate reward. This is the big why behind all that uncomfortable stretching we just discussed. The sentence concludes, will only help you to further raise your trait resilience level. Pay super close attention to the phrasing, will only help you. The source text is presenting this as an asymmetrical bet. In this framework, even if you are rejected, in fact, especially if you are rejected, the outcome is strictly beneficial. You're not just surviving the discomfort of the no. The very act of undergoing it is actively elevating a core baseline within yourself. You're literally extracting value from the rejection itself. The absolutely crucial point here is understanding exactly what is being raised. The text specifically uses the term trait resilience, and in psychology, there is a massive difference between a state and a trait. A state is temporary, right? Like you might be in a resilient state today just because you slept really well and had a great cup of coffee. But a trait is a permanent baseline level of psychological endurance. It is etched into your character over time. So, by practicing your response to rejection and actively stretching into discomfort, you aren't just hyping yourself up temporarily. You are structurally changing who you are. You're building a permanent immunity to the fear of failure. And this brilliantly illustrates how all the components of this brief, two-sentence text lock perfectly together into a cohesive, highly effective personal growth strategy. It starts with the mind. Practice your intentional response so you're no longer operating out of fear. Then it moves to action. Deliberately stretch into areas where rejection is the absolute most likely outcome, which creates the necessary tension for growth. And finally, it results in permanent transformation. You raise your trait resilience, leaving you fundamentally stronger and far more capable than you were before the rejection ever occurred. It's a real game changer. So, we've deconstructed this powerful concept from the source text, moving from passive fear to active discipline. But, as you know, understanding the framework is only the very first step. The discipline demands action. So, I'm going to leave you with a direct challenge inspired by the text we just analyzed. Look at your goals, take a hard look at your fears, and ask yourself, where will you stretch yourself today? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I absolutely cannot wait to explore more fascinating concepts with you next time.